Welcome, I see some familiar faces to the program Spencer Landscapes Then and Now. My name is Mary Baker Wood. I'm a town historian. This is a special program. It is part of an ongoing series I'm going to be doing on slideshows on various subjects in Spencer history. And since the first one, the Massasoit program, which is now on the Spencer Cable Access website and on YouTube, people have been giving me all kinds of suggestions, so I've got quite the list of what we're going to do in the future. But this is a special program. In full disclosure, I have to say I'm also on the board of directors of the Common Ground Land Trust, an amazing group of people and an amazing organization that has been working on open space and looking at our landscapes, looking at what we have in town. And Jan Park, who is our president, our fearless president for some time now, is just going to say a few words about what the Land Trust is and what we do.
We are very much interested in trying to preserve open space in our two communities. We have a long border between Leicester and Spencer. A lot of it's wooded. There's a lot of hiking trails. There's a lot of old farms. We want to see the landscape remain as healthy as it can and still develop as much business as we can. We're not an anti-business. We just like to see some trees, some land, some water, some trails in your neighborhoods for people to be able to get out and do recreation. For a number of things. We partner with the Snowmobile Club. We have activities with them. The Rod and Gun Club, we have hunters and fishermen who are part of us. Mountain bikers, what else, Bill? Help me. Mountain bikers. Cross-country skiing. So we're looking at lots of different recreation for lots of different reasons. We've always looked at land, and we're beginning to look at water for fishing and water quality in some of our lakes now. So we have a wide variety of interests, and your general landscape, which Mary is going to show with you, has really changed in the history of our Commonwealth. It was all heavily forested, and all the forest was cut down, and it was farmed, and that's when you got all your beautiful stone walls, and now the forest is coming back up and obliterating the stone walls, and you have to go out and find them now. And what we look at as a land trust is a healthy balance for all of us to have a healthy life, whether it's a mental health, a physical health. We want to get out and enjoy, and some people can't get out anymore, but that's one of the reasons Mary's trying to document everything on pictures. But we just want you to know that we are trying to look out for your future as well as look back at the past. And we care about the future of the landscape where you all live. And that's where I'll leave it right now.
The program we're doing today is based on collections, for the most part, that exist in the Spencer Historical Society collections. I'm hard at work up here. I do have hours on Tuesday mornings to do local history research. We're trying to expand those. We're trying to get the museum open again. So we do have the ability to come and research if you wish to. I also do a lot of that work online as well. There are people out in California who moved away and still have questions, and we try to answer those. But most of the material you're seeing today is either photographs or we have a few maps, we have some drawings and so on from our collections. I also culled a few from my own family scrapbooks. I actually am fourth generation Spencerite. I'm definitely a townie. We were always proud that our farm over on Cooney Road was the first one to have a steam tractor and the first one to have a flush toilet. So I just share that every program just so you know where we come from. So what we're going to do is start the program. This first view is probably one of the earliest views we have of Spencer. It's pre-photographs, so it's an 1840 view by a man named Barber who went through all of Massachusetts. There are volumes of these books. I think it's 2 volumes that were re-released. He went through and sketched every town in in Massachusetts, so everything from Scituate to whatever was a town in 1840. Unfortunately, East Brookfield is not among them. But so this was his view in around 1840, actually a little bit before that, of Spencer. And as you can see, Spencer was, and in the early days, we're going to talk a little bit about this, was basically forest that had been cleared and that was built for farms and for all the ways in which people needed the wood for fuel and so on. So you had a few trees around. This is a view looking from, it's actually sort of a distorted view, but it's looking from sort of where the high school is now, but a little bit closer. It would have been Greenland. So it's looking back over towards the old Catholic Church, up towards the old original town hall. I did do some research and found out it looks like this little structure up on the top is one of our early powder mills. One thing about Spencer is, and you can see here, this is probably the earliest depiction of the Muzzy area, Muzzy Meadow Pond. Spencer was based on the fact that we had running water and lakes and areas to build mills. So that's going to be a continuing theme as we look through this. So this is one of the earliest views we have of Spencer. What I want to talk about a little bit is how people perceived it, what Spencer first looked like when people came here, and then how it changed over time. And this is a quote from someone who actually visited. It's actually in the Tower History of Spencer, and a gentleman from France came and did some touring through Northeast America. And he visited Spencer in August of 1788. So we're talking just after the Revolution, early history in Spencer. And he says, "We slept the first night in Spencer, a new village in the midst of the woods. Those vast ponds of water which lose themselves in the woods. Those rivulets that wash the meadows, newly snatched from uncultivated nature. Those neat houses scattered among the forests. Those fields covered with trunks of trees, whose destruction is committed to the hand of time, and which are covered under the leaves of Indian corn." So he was celebrating the forest. And this is an early depiction, not of Spencer. We don't really have any good early oil paintings, and obviously not photographs yet of what Spencer looked like, but this is what folks believe that our area looked like. This is based on a set of what are called dioramas, and this is the first of the view. How many have been to Harvard Forest, to the Fisher Museum? Yes. Okay. Something up in Petersham, there's a terrific resource. It's the Harvard Forest, actually associated with Harvard University, but they're located out of Petersham. They have the Fisher Museum, and the Fisher Museum has a set of these. These are actually 3D representation. So I highly recommend it. It's a great trip out there, and you can stop at the Petersham Country Store and have a snack and then go up to the forest. Harvard Forest is actually doing some amazing work in documenting what has happened to our forests and woodlands over a period of time. They're doing a lot of scientific research. They're everything from invasive species to how the land is changing. So they do an amazing job, and they're a great research organization. But just to let you know, and Jan touched on this, in the early part of our history, up in the corner here, we can see that the land is looking open. It is just basically by the turn of the century, so around 1800, this area was now almost, most of the forests had been cut down, most of the major forests, and it was cleared for agriculture. And so this next part of the diorama shows, again, a cleared land. The stone walls are going up. It's the height of it. By 1850, and this is what always surprises me when I go back and look at by 1850, the forest was beginning to grow back. Although we associate this area with a lot of farms, it actually, the number of farms and the number of the amount of land clearing had already by 1850 begun to reverse itself. We were beginning to become the forested landscape. And you observe it probably here. Whenever a farm is let go, and whenever that land is empty, then the forest comes back. And certain species, so you will see sort of some of the brush species, and then some of the birches, some of the maples, and particularly white pine. So by the time we get to 1900, we have these stands of white pine throughout much of this area. We certainly had it in Spencer. And then by around 1830, this was second growth timber. So people were coming in and taking out the pine to harvest it. And then much by the way into this century, this was all beginning to grow back as different types of trees. So you're seeing different types of trees that grow in. And when you look around at how much of our area is forested, that's where it's that last wave that it came through. And to the point where this is very typical of a lot of the forests that we have here. Grown up, a lot of blowdowns. You find the abandoned stone walls. So what I'm starting with are bird's eye views. And this is one of the earliest. I think if you came to the Massasoit program, you know we talked about this. This is the 1877, one of the first of the panoramic maps that were drawn. There were companies like Bailey and Company that actually produced these maps, and they were trying to reproduce. They didn't have drones, they didn't have airplanes, but they tried to reproduce what a town would look like. They would go to the highest spots in the towns, and then they would travel through it. So in this map, and you can get, these are available online. Library of Congress actually has a whole set of panoramic maps. And so you can see in our town, for instance, in Spencer in 1877, here's the very center. This is the corner. We're right there, but we're not, the library isn't there yet. We have the old town hall, the Whittemore Pond up in this area. And notice that Grove Street is really not very well filled in yet, has a few homes. This really was the Grove. This was one of the treed areas that remained actually in this format for most of the years in our history. Cider Mill Pond, which used to flow right down through here, that had several mills on it and was used right into the center of Spencer. This was the Prouty factory, the shoe factory, later became Cleven's. Look at how this stands out. It was a huge, at one point it is said, we vie with Brockton for this, that it was one of the largest shoe manufactories in the world at the time. And as we travel through Spencer, Muzzy Meadow, of course, is over in here. We see one of the earlier of the Catholic churches. And then as we head down this direction, when we talk about landscapes, if you were coming into a town or if you were looking at this from a height, notice all of these smokestacks. These right in here, for instance, were down in Water Street. They were woolen mills. These little structures that you see are all the racks, the drying racks for the wool that were set out in the open fields. And then we get up through here, another smoking smokestack. We have then another huge smokestack. We do have the spires, you know, in New England, when you approach a New England town, one of the first things you notice is this. But this is an early representation of what Spencer looked like. And again, from the outgoing hills, notice that there's not much being built up there, and a lot of cleared land. You do see trees. For the most part in these early views, what you see are not stands of trees. This might be an exception, the Grove, where it was some original trees, but a lot of orchards. That was, people were using their land to grow fruit. And then we start, this is a series that was photographed in about 1885, and the Spencer Sun, which is our one of the early papers, or the proprietor of the Spencer Sun, I should say, had produced some of these so people could actually buy them, buy copies of them. They're in houses. I can't tell you how many people come to me with copies of these. There are a lot of them out there, not all in good condition. And I'm going to say at this point for this program, I've had to draw on a lot of original sources. Some photographs were in tough shape, but they were telling such a great story, we were using them. So some of them you'll see are better images. But this is a great set of photographs. And so Justin Clark Hill is over near where Prospect Street is, or where the churches, the Catholic churches are. So we're looking back at town. This is one of the original town hall. Actually, there have been 3 town halls due to fire. We lost 2 of them. This is Town Hall, up here a Methodist church, and then Grove Street would be going back up this way. And then we're looking, you can see that there are, they've got a lot of these board fences. There are a lot of these are fruit trees from the photographs we're looking at. This is looking back from High Street. So this is looking on the side, this would be looking over towards this direction. Look at how far back that factory went. It was a huge expanse. And then along here, Pleasant Street, and you can see the Congregational Church back up in the other section. This is from that same series looking southeast from Center, so you're looking again from the Church Street area, you're looking back towards the Congregational Church, heading out, and then heading out towards Worcester. And High Street looking back over towards town, again back towards the center of the town. This is looking west, so out towards West Main area, and look at, again, lots of empty space, where this area looks like it had probably second growth timber in it, so it was still not developed at this point. And again, if anybody sees something or has a question, raise your hand. Lincoln and Grass, same series, looking from High Street and looking back over, and notice that we've got a few mansions sitting up on the hill, but not heavily populated. We have a Prouty mansion going up there. We have a couple of others. And then just notice that we've got these open fields and all of these trees. I grew up on the other side of this, and I remember by the time I was young, you couldn't go up through this area. This was all had become wooded and grown in. And Grove Street. Notice the wooden sidewalks and the condition of the road. We complain about our roads now, and I sometimes think, yeah. I actually remember, and I'm thinking some of you remember, that Spencer still had dirt roads in the 50s. I mean, it was not all of them certainly, but there were quite a few. And this is Grove Street School. It does not have its second floor yet, so they're in the middle of building in that area. And then this is looking at East Spencer. This is probably from the high school area, because this is the green factory right near Dairy Queen. And again, you can just see the open expanses, these big old rocks. We've got some fertile, some fields that are being tilled, but not a lot of heavy growth. And Hillsville, this is where I love using pictures for research. I actually live over on this, so this is where North Brookfield Road goes up. This is probably looking from the hill there on Grant Street. But if we look over in this area, I was told for many years that the house where I live, which is near, whoops, I have to go back, was near Jim Devereaux's place, the Oakwood Barn, that this area, I was told that my grandfather used to go out for walks and stop there and eat apples. And he referred to them as night apples. Anyone New England enough to know that what night apples? They were the ones that you ate when it was dark, so you wouldn't see that you were eating a worm in the apple. Night apples, he ate night apples, but I was told, but I had no documentation. I've got some apple trees in my yard that are very, old kind of heirloom brands, and I look over in here and I say, okay, there's a planted orchard. That's definitely not just random. So that's where these kinds of pictures are really useful if you are doing this kind of research or if you grew up here. And again, this is going back up North Brookfield Road. Still a lot of open land, a lot of it farmed in Spencer. Spencer, at as late as 1948, had something like 132 dairy farms. Not all of them huge, but certainly a lot of farms. I grew up on a farm myself. There were poultry farmers. There were folks who were starting to do nursery work. It was still an agricultural town in many ways. And this is just another bird's eye view. This, again, from over by up behind the high school, a little closer, and you can see the Muzzy area up into town, and just the way it looks without a lot of trees. A lot of these views, I know if any of you came to Frank Morrell's program, where he was talking about then and now, and he has the old pictures, and then trying to capture a new view the same way, you can't, there are trees in the way. So these are sometimes helpful to kind of get a sense of how everything was related.
Mary?
Yeah.
Just a quick question.
Yeah.
On Muzzy Pond, did they build that, or was that something that?
Yes, almost everything. Because actually, I've got some views of it looking very sylvan, very natural. Just sort of dreamy pictures with greenery around it. But we saw water. New Englanders saw water as as a commodity, as something that ran our engines, which is why all of the mills, and we saw water as useful to embank. We used it for fire ponds. We used it for everything. So almost all of the ponds at one point, when we talk about Wire Village later, that was another case where almost everything was, there was a dam. This is a later panoramic view. This is 1892, and by this time in Spencer, you're seeing how huge, this is now a huge factory area. So Spencer Shoppers Village, that's where this is. Still a lot of open spaces out here. We have the track down here. We have the Spencer Fairgrounds. Cider Mill Pond, I remember, it actually flowed down into here and then underground under the town. You'll see pictures later in the 1955 flood. It actually overflowed and sort of swamped downtown Spencer. And that's when they started doing some flood control. When we were building the library annex back in the early 1990s, they were trying to figure out where that water was. I can remember it. My father was actually a purchasing agent for Cleven Shoe when it was still open over here. And he would come back across, he'd park behind here. We'd pick him up after work and he would jump. You could actually jump across the Cider Brook at that point. But once I was higher than the other, I always found it terrifying. But that was very much part of the downtown area as a water source. It also, there was someone who owned a boat, and he used to give you a boat ride, sort of like a recreational thing to do. I have known it only to be full of mosquitoes, so I'm not quite sure how pleasant those boat rides were, but they were very popular. And again, it was harnessed. There were mills all the way back up into the Whittemore Pond that, as time went on, that were used. These are now views of Spencer taken from an airplane. This is in 1953. We celebrated our bicentennial, and so a set of photographs were taken. And so here's where we see downtown Spencer. Again, the factory is still back in this, dominating, still a lot of smokestacks. The Sugden Block Library, there actually was a house. This house wasn't taken down until we did this project. So that was there, hotel's still there. And then again, you're beginning to see the trees filling in. So downtown is nonetheless looking pretty familiar to most of us by now. 1953. This area was the gas works. Spencer actually, in the late 1800s, had its own gas works, gas tanks, and created its own electricity. They were going to do gas lighting, and there were a couple of fires and a couple of explosions, so they ended up electrifying the town about 1888. So they did not use the gas for that, but this was a popular source. And actually, they partnered with what would have been the predecessor to Boston Gas, at the time New England Gas Company. But this was an area where you could go down, and you had a bridge along here. This is coming down Elm Street, and there was a bridge that you'd walk over, and it was one of those bridges that was just a grate, and you look down through at the river. It was quite an exciting experience. This all was taken down. It was the scene of a disastrous fire in the late 1800s. Rebuilt and then became the gas company. And you can't see it in this photo anymore. Part of the gas company actually had letters along the roof. It was a thing to do. About the 1920s, a lot of buildings across the United States would have a prominent building, would put the name of the town. And we had someone who found something in their attic here in Spencer. It was a Guggenheim, David Guggenheim, who funded a national project because airplanes were coming in, and they wanted people to be able to identify towns from the air. So he funded a project. He used post offices, I think something like 8,000 post offices, and then companies would choose to do this, and they would have like Spencer Gas Company or whatever written across the top of their building, and they used them for navigation. So Spencer was part of that project. This is another view from the same, and again, you're looking back along Main Street, up the high school and down to the center of town. And again, Muzzy, a prominent part of the center of town, and the two churches. And this, just another view of the same. And they evidently had a great time doing this. You can actually see the high school track. So this is a later, this is actually now, I'm going to go back. This is actually, yeah, these were photographs that were done in the 1980s, and they show a little, the same kind of things going on, but you now have a high school track here, and you have different buildings. I think there's another shot that shows it. But here, this is done in 1993. This is the Shoppers Village and Town Hall. We have a set of color photos of the town. So this is a way that over the time we were documenting what the town looked like. I'm going to do Google Earth, but because I'm afraid we'd go out and then we'll have trouble coming back.
Can you just go back 1 second?
I can.
Thank you.
I can.
Now, where Price Chopper and CVS?
Yeah, Price Chopper, CVS, yep.
Is that about the size of what Cleven Shoe was?
No, nowhere near. Nowhere near. It was huge. It went way back into here. And this green area would be where the cider brook was. So yeah, you can see the the change in, and we have a few other views of this, but and it's a good way of documenting over time. We use them, and sometimes I use that for identifying if someone hasn't told me a date. We'll go by and say, okay, what year? For instance, I think in a previous one, I was looking for it. The clue you use would be, yeah, okay, this is the one I was saying. I didn't really know how to date this photograph, but if you follow this, we've got the town here. You go down to here. The hotel is gone, so we know it's after 1982 because that's when the fire was. We can see that the library is here, but the house was still there, so we know it's before 1992 or so. And we can see that there's actually, that whole market area. So
The Sugden block.
that's the Sugden.
And then the library's to the right.
Yep, that's the Sugden, and that's the lot. So that's a way you can kind of do a little bit of sleuthing sometimes to figure out when a particular picture was taken. So that's, and we're going to finish up with Google Earth to take a flight over the town. This gets into some of the photographs. We're going to take kind of a tour of the neighborhoods and the types of areas we have. A center townscape in a New England town is iconic. There are the buildings that if you travel around New England, there are certain buildings, certain spires, certain kinds of landscapes in the town center itself. I'm not going to dwell on streetscapes. That's going to be another program. But this is probably around 1910. It's the front of the Isaac Prouty. So this is where the beginning of where you'd have the CVS Plaza. This building is actually, there's a building next to it that's still there. This was Bolton's Druggist. It was a popular place. See how the people are coming out? This is probably a shift change. Spencer, when Prouty Boot Shop and then later Cleven's, when they were in full operation, it would fill the streets. And I know a lot of people would love to see a program on Mechanic Street. I mean, when I was growing up, it was an amazing place. I think there's an effort in town to bring some of that back to be lively. But think of all the people that are coming here and heading down Mechanic Street to the shops. And also the bars. I know also Spencer was known as being a very wet town. So if you went back down, people would come out of the shop and have, I remember the stories of Wedge's Cafe, and Ma Wedge would there was someone who was a real character who worked in the shoe shop. And he would literally, when he got paid, walk down Mechanic Street, hand her his check, and she would give him his money for his food or rent or whatever he had, and the rest of it got turned over to Ma Wedge. So there are lots of stories I know out there when we do that kind of a program. But this was a very important part of Spencer. The other thing, if you notice up here, we had the particular kind of lighting. When Spencer was doing this renovation project, Steve Tyler, who was then in charge of it, contacted me and said, we're trying to find lighting that will kind of mimic what the town had. Well, I went through dozens of photos and couldn't find any. And what we found here is that this was the kind of lighting that mimics a little bit. And there's actually a better picture that I was able to find to mimic what we now have out here is to be historic lighting. This is what it looked like. This is about 1900. I honestly remember it looking this way into the 1960s. I remember going in with my father on a Saturday morning. He'd take us in, he would be going in to check something, and we would go, and it was a labyrinth. I mean, this place, now obviously there were fires over the years. Most of these buildings had brick firewalls because of the nature of the business they had. This actually, though, never really became destroyed. Parts of it were burned down at different times, and I'm sure Bob Parsons, who is a great historian for the fire department, can tell you some stories of the various, like bringing out the new LaFrance engine to fight a particular fire. But this was really a labyrinth. And then by the late 1960s, the business was going away. They moved over to North Brookfield for a while, and then eventually down to Tennessee. And so the business went away, and this is what happened. This should be about 1964. You can see the equivalent of the wrecking ball coming through, and look at all the folks out in the streets watching. David Suter, who's a wonderful local photographer, did a series, and we're actually going to be displaying those in the museum, did a series, very touching. He has some views of like back in the buildings with just a lone shoe sitting on the floor. This was the lifeblood for a lot of people who came, a lot of Irish, a lot of Canadian, French Canadian, who came here to work. So this whole thing coming down in 64. Just another view of it, looking back over towards, this is like Mechanic Street, so this is the top of it. This was when it was Faniff's. Many of us remember Faniff's store. It's now Frango's, I believe, is the business. This building's still standing, but this all came down and this became Shoppers Village. This is the implosion of one of those iconic smokestacks. And moment at which it came down. The town actually had to force the Clevens to take it down. They were taking their time, and parts of it were falling down, and they finally said, no, you have to actually take it down. And then,
Excuse me,
yeah.
At its peak, do you know how many people it employed?
There are probably about 150. I mean, it varies. It was how many people were employed. I find that different accounts talk about 150 to 200 people in all of those shops. I suspect that the figures are, we don't actually have their account books, so I'm not sure where they were. And the thing about this was that it had, and I don't know, you can really see it in some of these photos, in the areas behind it, see way back in here, you saw in previous pictures how far back it went. It also had businesses that went along with it. So they had like shoebox or box factories, and Baker Shoes, which became a fairly well-known Worcester shoe salesman, started off in there. So they used a lot of these. A lot of Spencer's buildings like this were used in multiple ways. And when you do the history, it probably was like 5 or 6 different businesses over a period of time that they became. And then this is just what we ended up with, was this. And again, that sort of lower landscape. Now the bigger trees are beginning to show up in the landscape, but that's where we ended up with. Now we're going to another part of town. This is an early postcard, Spencer Public Park. Spencer Public Park and the pine trees that were there were one of the few places in Spencer that were called groves. And so you would have original, probably it was second growth pine trees, but they were places where people would go. There was no air conditioning, so they were places to go to get cool. There were places where they went to picnic. Picnicking was huge. So in the same year, at the same town meeting that Richard Sugden donated funding for the library, Luther Hill donated funding for the park, and David Prouty for the high school. And we all say, where are those people now? Because that was an amazing set of gifts. Spencer, the public park, the trustees actually ended up feeling that this became a very popular, and as you can see, it's right on the main drag. This is Park Street. This is the Green property. This is the old Josiah Green factory. Dairy Queen is right around here. And you can see this big hulking building up on the top, and you're going to see it in several views. When you talk about a landscape in town, this dominated it. It was the Sibley Mansion. The Sibley family who ran the Sibley Farms had this built. We have pictures of workmen there in 1888, 1889, working, and the finest workmanship. This was an incredible mansion. When you see interior pictures, it was beautiful. woodwork and stained glass. This is another picture of that same mansion. You can see how elaborate. I mean, you just don't picture this as something in Spencer. And here are some of the workmen out in the front, having their picture taken with this. It actually only lasted until 1939. In 1938, we had a tough hurricane that came through here, did so much damage to the roof and so on, that this building was literally just taken down.
Mary?
Yeah?
Is it true it was never finished before it blew down?
Yeah, it wasn't complete. It's not so much that it wasn't completed. They basically did most of the work. It wasn't completely furnished because it wasn't used as a primary residence. The folks were not living there. So,
This is hobby.
yeah. Just like some of these big farms were kind of hobby farms. We have a picture later of Sibley where the people are all dressed up. This was like a social event. So anyway, this is a picture that you're going to see in a lot of different views of Spencer. This is another one now looking back from the high school area, what they call Green Hill, and we're looking back down towards the public park, towards Whittemore. And notice like we don't have a lot of houses hugging the shores yet. This is all open. And if you look into the back, it's funny, it looks almost like they're roads. It looks almost like ski runs, but the roads, but here's the Grove. There was also a grove up near on Bixby Street, up near where the police station is and the fire station. There was a grove, and they were popular places to go. This one actually had a pavilion. People would go and have picnics. The problem was, and you can probably see it in the next picture, this was a very popular spot. This is about 1910. Notice the mansions still. It's, when you now have like photobombing, you're showing up you have something unexpected showing up in the back of your picture. This was a mansion that photobombed every picture, I swear, of the center of Spencer. And these are people having a lovely excursion. I love the way they dress. Not only do they not have any life vests on, but they're all quite elaborately dressed with the little parasols going on. What happened was eventually, by about 1910, the streetcars were coming out here. People were coming from dreaded Worcester to come and use the park. Well, about that time, you can see it in town records, that the trustees of the park were not having any of it. And they actually there was a controversy in town about whether people should be allowed to come in and use our park. They were overwhelming it, and they're all coming out here and having a great time, to the point where Luther Hill got in a huff. They didn't really do anything about it. Luther Hill said, I'm going to take my bandstand and a couple of the other things that I built for this park, and he took them to East Brookfield because he was so miffed that we had, I don't think this would be like letting trash in. This wasn't, it was the numbers. It was just, and again, a pavilion, music, boats. It was quite the lively spot. This is another view of the same. Again, here we go with the mansion. And this is, they didn't actually, most of our lakes are dammed, so there were periods when the shores would actually, I don't know that they actually did drawdowns the way you do on most lakes now every year, but this is another view. Look how tall these beautiful pines are. This was a pretty amazing spot. And at the opposite end, over towards Wilson Street, on the same thing on Whittemore, was the Bemis Ice Company. Because we had the use of the train, we had ice companies in Spencer. They were not the only ones, but they were the best known. They would store the blocks of ice, come out and cut. We've got pictures of them out with oxen and with different kinds of tools, cutting the ice, store it in straw, and then it would be loaded onto trains and go down to warmer climes where they didn't have ice. So it was a going business for the time until electric refrigerators came in and kind of interfered with that business. This, just to finish up our tour of sort of the center part of town, this is down on Water Street. These are a couple of, I really don't have a lot of really good photographs, but this is one of the ones in one of the first pictures I was showing you how you had the billowing smokestacks. This was originally a wool mill, and then it became another type of mill, and then it became a slaughterhouse. So these buildings went through a lot of different iterations, and we have all of a variety of ages that we can see working here. And a little bit you can see there are trees, again, not a lot of population up behind here. This one you can see there's a mansion. I'm thinking that's up on McDonald Street at the end towards Prospect Street. But again, these were, and you can see the huge stacks. this makes me so nervous. I'm like, I hope that's not my kid up there having the picture taken. But this was, part of the landscape of downtown Spencer. Now we're going to venture out north. This is Lincoln Street. You could see from one of the earlier pictures that we looked at that not a lot of buildings had been put up. This was one of the Prouty mansions. We're looking over at Grove Street over here. And again, a lot of empty space. The Grove, the green part is over on this side. But look at these elaborate greenhouses. And I've just shown this to look at how open the landscape still was. This was probably also about 1910. Now we're heading back out north. Some of you will recognize this because this was another part of our landscape. The rural cemetery movement, and we've done a walking tour there, one or two, brought in the whole idea of a manicured landscape built for a cemetery. This is the Pine Grove Cemetery. I grew up right next to this. I hate to tell you, but we used to kind of pretend that we were mountain climbing along the edges. It's got like a little stone place there. But these were beautiful spots, and actually they were treated like parks. There was a water source there. There was a little place with benches. So this was part of a movement and part of our landscape. And again, you can see all these beautiful, probably second growth, mostly white pine. This is actually also a view. There's the cemetery in the background. This is the Spencer Fairground. Spencer Fairground was huge. The Agricultural Association was very active in the late 1800s and early 1900s. They would have all of these functions. They actually were called, it was called Myrick Park when it was first opened, because Nathaniel Myrick donated money. And someone has recently just donated a full set of china. They actually would serve meals, and they had their own china. So I meant to go back to serve meals, and then grandstands and horses. There were bicycle races. There were all kinds of things going on. This is now in the north part of town. This is at the end of what is now Eagleton Street. And Lower Wire Village Road starts over here. This is the small house. For those of you who work so hard, and for those of us who have done so much trail clearing down the Spin, this is the house that's still there. This was the original barn. This is the house I grew up in. It was across the street from it. And this barn burned down in 1948 before John Small took over the farm. So you can see a little bit. And this actually in the front, I'm told, this is from family albums, was they were building a chicken coop. And so that's what this was. But again, this is north part of town. If we go up north, continue out north part of town by the cemetery, you're going to go up North Brookfield Road. And many of you will probably recognize this is the Sherman House. It was originally a hill house. There was actually a furniture factory here. It is now the only, and I know the Sherman family worked really hard on this, this is the only National Register, individual National Register home in Spencer. It was, I think 2 years ago, received that status because it is one of the oldest houses in Spencer. And this whole area was hill land. They ran, and this, again, a lot of us remember the big old elm trees and maples. There were some beautiful old trees that had persisted into this time. And then if we go farther up the road, this is probably around 1948. This was Proctor's farm. This is again, and you'll get the whole idea. This is going up North Spencer Road. Kittredge would be coming in over here, and typical farm. You've got the stone wall along here, the multiple silos, multiple outbuildings. The farm still exists, and they are still doing some farming there. This is going back. We were coming back from the cemetery, heading north. This is just as you turn the corner, heading out 31 north after the cemetery. The Langevin, if anyone remembers the Langevins, they lived right here on the left. This is all trees, all pines right now, because up here is the intersection of North Spencer Road. But this was a public well house. That's the other thing about Spencer's water sources. We had lots of public wells. The water is so good in many parts of Spencer that people would come bring their own receptacles and come and get. And I guess if you were walking along this dusty road, you would stop there for your water. And then this barn it was the Zukas farm. This is now gone. But this was all farmed land. And then most of you know where the Abbey is today. This is, however, the predecessor. This is the land, the Sagendorf farm. I've actually we're trying to combine our archives. I worked with the archivist for the Abbey has a lot of pictures of Sagendorf farm, so we've kind of shared some of so some of these are actually ones that were turned over to them when the Abbey in the early 1950s took over this land. The Sagendorf, like the Sibley, was a show farm. The folks were very wealthy. They prided themselves on Ayrshire cows. Beautiful. They were always mentioned in Ayrshire Digest, if that's something you ever read. It was quite the place. And some of these buildings still remain on the Abbey property as infirmary or as farm buildings that they had. Actually, the Sagendorfs hired a lot of local people. My godmother was, their name was Craig. They were the couple who ran the farm for the Abbey. And they would have people in to do the sort of the daily chores of the farm and running the operation. She actually was an amazing cook, and she fed all of the farm workers. But these were, look at the beautiful stonework. I mean, this was a pretty amazing. And again, I just wouldn't want that to be my kid. They're all standing on the top having their picture taken. And this is just another view of Altercrest. Actually, Altercrest started down on Pleasant Street. It was down on the left side of Pleasant Street before you get to Smithville Road, so and then expanded to this. And again, they were well-known, beautiful herd, well-known in the business. This is one of the first, this is a tilling machine at the Sagendorf, so this is Abbey land. I believe over here is where the solar display is now, but mechanization was big. It was exciting when people got their steam tractors or their, this is a steam tiller. So people would turn out. The Sagendorfs were also some of the first to get motor vehicles in Spencer. And then this is another aerial view. This is, the Abbey would be over here, the actual Abbey headquarters. This was the Spencer Poor Farm. Almost every town in New England had a poor farm. And it was for people, widows who didn't have an income, children who were left orphaned, men who couldn't hold regular jobs, and they would work at the farms. They produced, they actually did the farm work. And so Spencer had the poor farm, and actually someone came when we had the roadshow project a couple of years ago. Someone came and he said his family was the last family to operate the poor farm, and he's the one who provided this particular picture. Right now, we'll see aerials later. This whole area, all the way up here, it heads up towards Browning Pond Road. This is over heading farther north in Spencer. This is entirely now a solar array. This whole area has been taken over. And so in the early 1950s, there was a Cistercian order who had a tragic fire at their place in Rhode Island. And so they came here. Father Blaze was the architect. Actually, I have an uncle who is a carpenter, and he actually helped build the pews. He worked with the Abbey for years to do specialty work. But this is, you know, the chapels are here. You can still visit it. I think it's one of the most beautiful views in Spencer when you get to the top of the hill, particularly if you've earned it by walking. Yes. I do. It's a good spot. This is just an aerial view of what the, so we have the circle there at the Abbey place, and then all of the outbuildings, and a lot of these outbuildings that remain were part of the Sagendorf farm. And see, they have kept a lot of this in farmland on this area, but here's what happened to the rest of it. This is where the poor farm was. This is one of the second largest solar array in New England right now. It was partly, there's some money to be, that they get from leasing the land. The brewery is very successful. I don't know if that might have changed how things happened, but this is what has happened to a large one. This was one of the most beautiful agricultural pieces of land. And we're continuing out to towards the end of North Spencer Road. This is the Browning Pond intersection. I think some of you recognize this because you live very near to this. And this, again, you see a lot of open space, a lot of still very large trees. And then out towards the end of this was the original house that Isaac Prouty, the Isaac Prouty of the boot factory fame, had. And you started to find these in the 1800s as people moved uptown or abandoned farming or whatever, you would find a lot of these sort of derelict barns. But notice we still have the traditional stone wall, and we have the fruit trees growing around it. And this going all the way out in North Spencer, this is called Camp Honey. This was out at Brooks Pond. It was, these folks are out there hunting. It was a fine gentlemanly sport. So this is probably late 1800s, about 1889 or so. They would camp, and again, we've got all these lovely ponds in Spencer, and so they would go and camp in these areas. And also fishing creel over here and all the various arms. And because we had this mixed wooded land and we had the water, we had lots of wildlife that they could go out. And maybe it was also a bonding experience. It was named after a gentleman who was a successful businessman in Spencer. And the same area, this is Brooks Pond. Actually, half of it is in North Brookfield, but this is what it looks like today. This is probably an area where they had been encamped. And then slowly the pond became a site for camps. We're going to head out now to South Spencer. This is down at O'Gara Field. It was now known as O'Gara Park. It was originally a railroad park because if you've done the rail trail, you know that the rail trail comes in behind here. And the Matchless team was an amazing, famous Spencer baseball team. They were well known at their time. And this is looking back up towards town. Again, how different it looks. But this was the site in 1930. This is building the grandstands down there. And again, you can see the big pine stands that were all left behind these. But this was the park. This is probably something, this is from my own family album. This is the Pray for Us Cemetery, as it's known, the Catholic cemetery. And this was back in about 38. And the Pray for Us is already established. I believe that's my uncle's shadow. He was quite the photographer and was taking this picture. And again, the trees look a little bit sparse, but here's the Pray for Us. Here's how it looks today. Much more lush and pretty amazing. And again, when you talk about landscapes, this is another one of those landscapes. People can see it from the air. People know us. I've had people say, oh, you're in someplace else that nobody would have heard of Spencer. And one of the things they might say, oh, that's the Pray for Us place. Yeah, okay. Yes, pray for us, please. And this, as you may recognize, South Spencer and Route 9, this is the Flexcon complex, another business that came. They actually started down on Wall Street over here in a much smaller operation. Miles McDonough who became a great benefactor to the town and to many in the area. But they built this. So this opened in the 1960s in this whole, and it's quite a large area. And notice here you're heading back towards, there would be Spencer State Forest, a lot of heavily forested land back here. But that's South Spencer. Now we go down a little bit just beyond, down South Spencer, just beyond the corner. So not down where the dump is now. On your right side, for the most part, was the filter beds. This is actually, I have later pictures of them doing this with trucks. This is in early days. So this one, it says on the picture that it's, I think, 1887 or something. Spencer had the filter beds. They were the early sanitation, nothing like we had now. If you grew up in Spencer, many of you probably remember across the street was the dump, and it really was a dump. You would back up and just shove the stuff over the edge. I was always afraid that my father would back the car over the edge of it was a huge mound. And on the opposite, but on the way out to the dump, the original dump, were filter beds on all sides, and that was where the Spencer Water filtration system was. It would basically open beds, and the water would filter through. I remember all kinds of birds that would be down there, like seed type birds. It was not, but in the summer you would roll your car windows up because it was quite an odor. And again, the same area, South Spencer on the right side of the road, just built up. But again, now you can't see any of this. It's all, the trees are in them. This was the original Elias Howe house. The house actually came down in the early 1900s, but this was in South Spencer. And again, almost every pond you see around here was backed up for farm use, for water, for some sort of dam. Almost every pond and almost every waterway had probably multiple dams, multiple factories or mills on them. The Spencer State Forest, this is something that, this says it's the Cook Trail in Spencer. It doesn't look like this anymore. The conservation, the CCC came in, so they were at work during the Depression. Young men, to give them jobs, would be hired by the CCC. I do a lot of hiking out in the western part of the state, and a lot of the bridges and huts and places like that are CCC built. But they actually had crews who came out and built some of the stone work and some of the roads that you see in Spencer. And this is just now one of the trails, this one maintained by the snowbirds. Yeah?
Do we know where that last trail is?
I looked it up and met, but I haven't been back down since I found it, so I'm going to take a walk down there.
Heard the name.
Yes, no, I think it's another trail. I think it's where we used to go. There was a way that you could go and back, and then you'd come back to do a great brookie fishing along there.
Howe Park?
Yeah, behind Howe Park. So I think it goes out around behind. I'm not absolutely sure. I'm still researching that. I was kind of surprised to see that, but they did a lot of that work. And this is, again, Howe Park, the waterfall. And this is what I remember. There was a nice little beach there. It was maintained. People went there swimming, and there were great, some of the smaller waterways, good fresh water and great brook trout fishing, and just a beautiful spot. And this is actually a part of the old, in South Spencer, where the rail trail is. So this is looking down. Again, it's all trees now. We can't see this view the same way, but this was the railroad going through just near the East Brookfield, in South Spencer, going towards the East Brookfield line. And this is another part of South Spencer. I was just here probably about 3 weeks ago. This is Royal Crest Farm. It's one of the few farms that is still making a go of it. They are raising Angus. They sell grass-fed meat. They have a shop there now. We did a tour with our Envirothon group. Amazing operation that they still have there, and I guess they're going to expand to chickens and pigs. But look at how beautiful this land is. It's still operating as a farm. That's one of the few places left. Then this is all South Spencer. These were this is just a series that was done in the early part of the early 1900s. The dates vary, but these were some farms. This is a Berkheim farm. You see a lot of these kind of pictures where everybody dresses up and they're on their horses or bring out their carts. It's a whole ritual to have your photograph done. This was the old, it's now the Pilling place. This was the Joshua Lamb farm. This burned down in the late 1800s. But it still existed as a farm. Look at the elaborate work. We've got looks like a hay pile out here. But this is a very iconic New England landscape. And then these are just a couple of, I think this was the Mason farm. Again, we see the large trees and that were in part of it. A lot of fruit trees that they're growing, and then the usual stone walls and fences. This is the old Elias Howe, another view of the Elias Howe Senior farm. Again, the building was actually taken down. Right now, if you go down to Howe Park, there's just a memorial there, and I believe the doorstep is still in view. And this was just another view in again, South Spencer. This was another view. This is another one of the Bemis family farms. And this is the Guilford farm. There's a corner here. You come when you're heading out towards the park. This again burned down. A lot of these burned down. And remember, these were wooden structures, and people were heating and lighting with flammable materials. So a lot of our farms are lost, and it's amazing that we have documents of them. And then the last feature, we're talking about landscapes in Spencer. When you're looking around, Spencer is known for its ponds. A lot of people have lake homes. This is Sugden Reservoir, another popular spot. A little hazy. This is Thompson Pond. And this is Browning Pond. And I'm sorry if you live in Cranberry, I didn't have a good picture of Cranberry, or there are multiple homes that folks live on. But it's always been an attractive feature, and whenever you do studies about what people like about Spencer, they talk about the rural aspect, and they talk about the waterways, the ability to fish, and some of the things that we're still trying to make happen. So up until now, we're looking at things, the built environment and how it changed over a period of time. But we were also making changes ourselves. The weather Mother Nature was having its effect, and we were building, and we were changing what the landscapes looked like, what the transportation. This is now downtown Spencer in the era of the railroad. And the railroads that came through brought they brought business to Spencer, they brought people here to come and work. It was a thriving, this is hard to imagine. This is down see the depot? This is down in that lower section of Spencer. It's hard to imagine how, and this was some sort of dedication, they're not about to be run over, but it is it was a pretty amazing thing, and a lot of freight. I remember being young, you would go down to South Spencer and watch the railroads go by, with all the romantic names on the railroads. This is the New York Central Railroad. This came through. This is actually in South Spencer. Hence the source of the rail trail. We had rails. And these are some folks from South Spencer waiting patiently for the rail to come through. I just love how they're all dressed up waiting for the train. But that meant that more landscape was changed. You had to clear the land. The irony, of course, is that many railroads now are being returned to rail trails. Cape Cod is doing it. We're doing it in our area. But it meant a change in the landscape. It meant a change in how things were. This is the trolley coming out to Spencer. Trolley, again, made a huge difference in how people could get into the city and get into Worcester. This is Breezy Bend in a winter snowstorm. And notice all of these. See how people collect these now, these insulators all over the top of the electric wires. But this was, and I guess people would kind of pile out and help with moving it along. And this is here's the bank across from the town hall, the bank block. And we have the Worcester, Leicester, and Spencer trolley. I remember my own grandmother going in. She raised chickens, and she would go into Worcester she had someone who bought the eggs, and they would use this as transportation. Other kinds of transportation we have. This is Grove Street. That's what it says on the photograph. But here we now have the deliveries. This is the Great Atlantic and Pacific Tea Company, A&P. Actually, later into the 1950s, there was an A&P right on Main Street over here. It became a Finest, I think, but it was an A&P. It's the first grocery store I got lost in. You got to understand, it was a very small store, but they would do deliveries early days. Again, now, so you have to have roads and access to all of these businesses. There were people, all kinds of carters, people doing business, carting materials and goods and so on. So you now are expanding the road networks in Spencer. And this was my mother's school bus. This is the old Village Bell. Mr. Parker drove this, and this is actually over on coming up Hastings Road. This would actually, no, I'm sorry. My mother would probably be horrified. It was my grandmother who rode in this. It was called a jitney, and it was a horse-drawn transportation because you'll see it later, Wire Village School was up around the corner. And so he would come around and I guess was kind of look out for the school kids. Look at how tall it is, and there are no seat belts. It's an entirely different experience. And then the age of the auto comes to Spencer. This is at the Bemis property in Spencer, actually out in North Spencer. And this is someone in a 1910 Peerless is the name of this car. This is when it took off. We started having people coming out to these areas to Spencer to visit, to see our beautiful lakes and our farms and the whole bit. So I just thought this was, rather than a boring picture of a car, they look like they're having a great time there. And this is an old Tarvia truck. This would have been in the 1930s. Spencer decided that some of these roads were getting beat up. Certainly Wire Village and Lower Wire Village Road were so heavily trafficked because of the wire mills and the heavy loads that were being brought across them that they started, because most of the roads had been dirt, they started, first of all, with this process. Tarvia actually was a specific product by a specific company. It was a form of coal tar, and you would have ground rock, and you would spread it on the roads, and then tarvia would be put over it. I remember, asphalt and having roads, what they call macadam roads or macadamized roads, which were the next generation of that. But this is one of the earliest of Spencer's highway department out there looking out for our roads. And then this one, the picture's a little fuzzy, but this is Clem's right here. This is actually, and it's hard to see, this is actually a cement mixer. This is when they were first putting the road out to East Brookfield, first macadamizing it, putting an actual first of the series. Again, I remember Hastings Road, for instance, a lot of it was called Frink Hill, and no, it was just a dirt road. A lot of them were at the time, but they were beginning over a period of time to switch these over. And then this last one, this one, Mother Nature, we've got piles and piles of storm pictures. This was actually in the 1930s, like the ice storms we've had in recent years, some of these would be devastating, and they would lose these beautiful old trees. These towns all had such gorgeous old trees. This is the 1938 hurricane. Mother Nature really, and if you've read anything about the history of New England itself, was destroyed by this. We lost more timber. It was during the Depression, or at the end of the Depression, so it gave a lot of people jobs to go in and do that timber work. But this is right before the South Spencer underpass. So this is the trees that are down in front of it. You weren't getting to the train that day. But this is the kind of destruction. This is from my family albums. This was, remember how beautiful, we've looked at all of those pictures of Luther Hill Park and how lovely it was and how beautiful the trees were. It just came and took all of these down. And there's a picture of my uncle in there logging the hurricane timber. Again, it was a way, we were getting to the end of the Depression, and people actually were able to make work. We've got other pictures of a government scaler who would come out. The scaler would come out and measure the timber. But this is what the area around Whittemore Park looked like. This was Thompson Pond when they were cutting and just floating all of the trees. Again, everywhere around here. I know our farm, the family farm, had a windmill that got blown over. It was a devastating. And then this, we've just seen this. This is my Uncle Jim, and this is logging out at the cemetery. Yes, at Pine Grove Cemetery. This is looking back over towards Lower Wire Village, but this was logging out, or no, I guess it's at the other side of it. This was logging out. He was 19 years old, and a lot of young men were doing this kind of work. And this is downtown Spencer. Again, the shoe factory is still here, the lovely old cars, and then just whole trees just felled. Oh, and in case you didn't want to see it the first time, I had two pictures. And here's someone, I love this picture of the guy in the suit supervising very carefully, make sure. I have not been able to quite, I think from town pictures I may be able to figure out who he is, but he's supervising. The 1955 flood. I told you that this area over here, the cider mill, just completely overflowed. And then there were streams that were flowing through, and dams and ponds, Muzzy, all of them through town. And so this would completely, completely took it out. This is the bottom of Mechanic Street. Again, it just opened. There was no putting it back. And this, looking back, this is the house I grew up in. This is looking back from the cemetery side of the bridge. It totally washed out the bridge. 1955, and I actually saw this happen. I was standing in that window. We knew, and Mr. Small lived here. This was all farmland. We knew that they were afraid that the Sugden Dam, which was farther up, was going to go out, and we kept hearing that news. And I remember I was standing right in there, looked down just in time to see the bridge taken out. And of course, it's bringing timber. It actually washed part of the number 5 mill, the wire mill that was coming down. And Mrs. Kittredge had used a part of the mill which wasn't active then for chickens, dead chickens coming down there. It was, and this whole area actually, it destroyed the farmland. It's amazing when you see what the small farm is now, that it survived it. There's another part of nature. This is actually, and I know it's hard to read, but this is Dezem's elm tree. This was in the era of the Dutch elm disease. some of our finest trees came down. This happens to be, again, the house I grew up in. This is we had 2 large elms in the front, and folks had to come down and take them. They were all becoming dangerous to have up. So this is in the era when I also remember the town department coming through and spraying DDT on everything. And we were told to stay. It was sort of casual. Well, stay inside. The truck is coming. But there weren't the kind of precautions there are now. This was another one of the sad duties. And here, Mother Nature, my fellow members of Common Ground will know this well. This is Japanese knotweed. We grew up thinking, we called it bee balm or bamboo. We had it out behind our barn. We used to make tunnels through it. This is an invasive species that's taken over, and we have a number of places on our properties where it's almost impossible to eradicate. If you're driving around Spencer, you're talking about landscapes, if you're driving around Spencer, you're seeing a lot of this. And this is the other kind of pest that's coming in, Mother Nature having her way. This is water chestnut, and we've just been talking about how this can overtake a pond. And so a lot of the pond associations have very strict rules now when you put in a boat that you not have milfoil, or that that your boat is clean when you put it in. But so those are the ways Mother Nature was changing us. I've been researching quite a bit on Wire Village. This is an area that my family grew up in, I grew up in, but more important, I think it's a good example of the fact that there are still spaces of Spencer that have that wonderful combination of historical artifacts that are left, a beautiful place. The Turkey Hill Brook runs through here. And I just want to give an idea of what we're talking about. This is Lower Wire Village, and just one of the local maps. So this is Hastings Road. This would be Lower Wire Village Road, and you know the dam. I told you that there was the dam that washed out in the 1955 flood. This is the huge mill dam that was behind it for the mill. And actually, if you go along Lower Wire Village Road, you'll see some buildings. There's one along this side that were part of mill number 4. I have a picture of it too. And then this going up to the other way, heading up towards Gold Nugget would be up beyond here. And then this is the Upper Wire Village, this is Gold Nugget, Lower Wire Village, and then this is Paxton Road. All of this was owned by the Spencer Wire Company. This was a huge, one of our largest business. They did an amazing, and you will see that they did an amazing business, but they also had all of these mill ponds, all of these dammed areas. There's a whole canal system that you can still see. If you go to the Ralph Warren Park, and walk up and through, you can see the dam system. We've actually done a library walk here too, along this road. This business was, all of these businesses along here were owned by the wire mill. All of those houses along Paxton Road as you go down the hill were at one time part of that. They were mill workers' housing. When the mill collapsed in the 1940s, it was sold to a private entity, and he sold them as individual lots, but this was all owned. And Richard Sugden's house, we'll see in a minute, is right at the corner of the Gold Nugget Road and Paxton Road. And you know how the spillway comes in over on this side? I mean, it was interesting. It was called, the upper part was Sugdenville, and the lower part, the lower village, was called Proudyville in those days. This is also from my own album, the family album. This is from Hastings Road. Again, you can't get this picture. We have trees on this side of the road, and turkeys crossing this area. They live in this woods. But this is where the intersection is of Hastings and Lower Wire Village. This is where that dam was. This is the mill buildings. They're no longer there. If you go down in that river, we walk along there, you can still find, when we were kids, we thought it was meteorites. It's slag. It's some of the wire processing, from the annealing plant. And then up along here, the Jecker Homestead, which tourists came out to, and then this was my family farm. So we had Grandview Farm, the barn, and this here. And then look how open this all is as we look over. There's still fields there, but this is what that part of Wire Village looked like. So I'm just trying to put this into perspective. So this is coming up, this would be the small farm. So this is at the end of Eagleton Street, or coming across the beginning of Lower Wire Village, just as you're heading up. And this is, again, from my family album, There's My House. This is where we were just looking at. This is where the road would go. Small farm over here. and my uncle out here with our family oxen. And there was a gas station here, and for many of us who grew up in Spencer, we remember it fondly. Holdroyd's gas station. Used to get Hoodsy cups there. They were our neighbors. So, and he had one of the original. You know, when you didn't have automatic lifts, he actually had a pit that you worked on the cars from. But this is the very beginning of that. There's that elm tree that was so huge and beautiful, and then we lost it later.
So say again, Mary, what is that street?
So this is a small farm, so small house. This barn burned down in '48. The barn actually is set back now more.
There were more houses on that corner.
Well, yes, the garage part was. That house is still there. The house is still there. The small farm house is still there. The barn was burned down, and a new Dutch-style barn was built, so it was set back more into the driveway. And then this house is still here. The house I grew up in is right at the corner. So
The Gulf sign, that sits over the little...
yes, this was a gas station. You go in here to go and hang around.
That little island that sits there now, it's always
Yes,
curious.
yes, but it was not in the island. It was to the right of it. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah,
Where the small farmhouse is,
yeah,
behind that house,
yeah,
after that flood,
yeah,
there was a trench, the full width of the fields,
Yeah.
60 feet deep,
yeah,
where the water had come down, took the bridge and everything.
yeah.
The Army Corps of Engineers
Yeah.
came in and rebuilt it.
Right. I remember because Mr. Small had a heart attack. It was such a
And Carl Newman
yes,
did the interior of that.
yes, he did. They brought this
It was in
back.
the Sunday feature parade.
Yeah, yeah. No, Carl Newman did a lot of work for them. And this house was actually a tavern. It's a fairly old house. It was a tavern. I was there when they opened out, they had a beehive. They had a huge, fireplace. Yes. Yeah, yes. And when you opened up, they found, the usual things you find inside the chimneys. But the whole house was redone. Yeah, yeah. It was, I have such a fondness for what this whole area was, and we all have that about whatever neighborhood we grow up in. I think when you're young, you take it for granted. So now we're coming up to the corner. This would be Hastings Road, and this would be Lower Wire Village, and there's the, I don't know much longer those are going to be there,
Now,
but
that bridge is the only surviving bridge from the flood.
right,
All the rest of the bridges all through Wye Village, down by Smalls and all
Yeah.
that, every one of them got taken out.
yeah.
That one got plugged with rocks, and it washed out on both sides.
Yeah, because it was taking out, parts of the actual mill buildings and then all of the big boulders that were along there. So, so what you're talking about, that's right there. That's the bridge would be down here. This was the dam. It was, if you go there now, you don't get a sense of how high it was, but on the right side, like down in here, you can still park in there and walk
You
along.
can see the wall to the right hand.
Yes,
side is-
yes. But it was actually, look how huge it was. And I'm very vague, because as I said, I was 5 when it went out. So I vague because we went to, visit the other part of the family on this side. But look at how incredible this structure. And then it was a huge, what I was showing earlier, a huge farm pond. I mean, a huge mill pond behind there. And when this went, you're right, it just took, it took rocks, it took out part of someone who had chickens there, it took out most of Mill 5. The mills were still around when I was young, but they were derelict by then. Pretty powerful when you think of how that happened. And then this is just riding a little farther up beyond that bridge, so we've just passed that area. And this is the intersection. You'll go to Lower Wire Village Road, Upper Wire Village Road, or this is Hastings Road on this side. And this is just the corner. Mr. Bully lived there when I was young. It was quite a spot. And this is the exact same spot in the 1930s. Let me do that. I'm sorry, I'm getting so excited about all this. This is a lovely car. Again, these roads weren't, trafficked the way they are today. So I can remember going out and playing, hand tennis in the middle of down at the bottom of Pleasant Street. It was just common. But this is, and up here I'm going to show you this, there was a house that was right up on the corner, and this is a house. This is the Jecker homestead. My understanding is it's for sale again.
Mary, I was born in that house.
You were? What?
1944.
Really? Because I know it when the Simikauskases were there, which was much later.
Oh, yes.
Oh, I'm glad to find somebody who actually, yeah, because our family place was up around the corner. But this, you can still see this part of the house, and you can still see this cone-shaped wall. This was known as the Jecker Homestead in the 20s and 30s. It was actually a very popular place for people from the city, from Boston and other urban areas to come out. They would come out to ruralize. And so it was actually like a sort of a boarding house, and it also had a very famous spring there. I don't know if you remember the water. They actually sold it. Jecker. I've seen, you know, the bottles of it. There, it was Jecker Springs water because it was very pure. And Eddie Prouty, who lived there at the time, who made it into this sort of tourist destination, actually led a local band. Somebody said that has been researching and has contacted me because they said he actually wrote Sloop John B., the song. So I'm still trying to figure out if Eddie Prouty actually read that. So what do you remember about living in that neighborhood? Yes, the chinchillas, yes. I've heard that. Yeah. Yes, I'm glad to find somebody who's that, because I know the Simakoskis family were there and in later years, but these were and this happened a lot. Spencer was a popular until the hotels started to be built and it was easier for people to get motor cars could go anywhere in New England. A lot of people would come in here. Actually, my grandmother met my grandfather because he was a Donnelly who came out from Boston to ruralize, to come out to the farms, and that's how they met. So I've always thought that was kind of a neat thing.
All right, this picture.
Yeah.
This picture is just as you're gonna go up Gold Nugget and
Yep.
Hawaii Village, just a second.
Yep.
Behind the red building was a military storage building. That was full of all the old red shield lanterns and stuff
Yes.
they used during the war. Behind that was a 4-story building, factory building, that was full of chickens. Lions owned that.
Yes.
Where the trailer is, on
Yeah,
the left-hand
yeah.
side, there was a house.
Yep.
It sat right there.
Yep.
Now, as you come back down towards where the bridge, I was saying,
Yeah.
the bridge didn't get.
Yeah. Yeah.
There was another full-size pond
Yes.
on Turkey Hill Brook.
Yeah.
And all the buildings along the left-hand side
Yeah.
had circus equipment
I've heard that.
stored in them. They had carousels
Yes.
and all kinds of.
Do you know
kids,
why?
they all crawled
I've heard that. I don't know why.
through. Yeah.
Okay, well, then you're going to see some familiar buildings because this is one of the earliest pictures.
Yeah.
There's where it is.
Now,
There's the dam.
There's the 4-story chicken house in the back.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
That went. The
Yeah.
house to the left went.
Yep. Well, there are better pictures of it. Here's another view from that. Again, these are really old pictures. There's several of it was mills 1, 2, and 3. The annealing mill was up in here. That burned down more than once because that's what the whole origin of the wool business was to make carding wool, because to make wire for carding. When you process wool, if you've ever been to Old Sturbridge Village, you can see they do it with hand carders, but this originated because someone one of the Prouties originated the method to make this finer wire. And one of the parts of the process for making this wire was annealing. You would, in order to keep drawing it thinner and thinner, you would have to put it in these vats of water. And of course that was dangerous. And all of this, up until 1915, all of this was done on steam power or water power. It didn't have it wasn't electrified till 1915. So you're talking about all of these, because here's the dam again, and but look at what a huge complex that was, and how many people work there.
Now, I've heard 10 minutes. I don't know if it's actual or not, but within 10 minutes of Sugden breaking loose, Thompson Pond broke loose
Yeah.
as well. So you can imagine the mass of water that came down onto these buildings. I was a kid. I remember being down here maybe a half hour after it happened.
Really? Yeah.
And
It was devastating.
as you go to the lower pond that's in Lower Wye Village,
Yeah.
the wall of water that came around the corner, it was like 60 feet high.
Yeah. Yeah. It was like a tsunami.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it flooded all the way down where the big Y and all of that is. That was all
yeah, yeah.
a pond.
That's interesting to get the first-hand accounts because, and that whole flood prompted flood control throughout this area. There are now strict flood control rules and laws. There, the way you get insurance maps, they have that out. Wire Village also had a combination of farms but almost everybody made their building. The wire mills actually, when Richard Sugden died, Harry Goddard took them over. It became a very social. They were very supportive, and we're going to see in a couple of minutes how they would. But I'm told that they would actually run buses to Worcester for the employees or to go out and do shopping. I found pictures of articles about my grandfather being on a social committee that would, they would have various events. So it was the wire mills and these, and this is a very beautiful picture actually of just another angle. But just to give you an idea of how, when you drive by there now, you have no idea of how, and of course the trees have grown in. This is, my grandfather's in one of these, but this was behind where the annealing shed was, and this very iconic belfry. And again, a lot of these places had these passageways. I mean, they were kind of scary places in some ways. And OSHA was not around at that time. This another view. And this is, the reason I love this picture is, how did the person who hung all this white laundry out feel about that? I don't know. I don't, because there were homes in there. I mean, you remember there were homes in here, and people lived all the way up Paxton Road. There was one man who had a dance hall. Lanigan's Dance Hall was right up on Paxton Road. But yeah, this was an amazing, just like the shoe shop, because Clevens and Prouty was so huge. This is Mill 4, so this is Upper Wire Village Road, but this is along in here. This was the Bell's house. This is a Mill 4, right? And this, but you're talking how big the pond was. This from that dam we looked at before. If you drive along that road now, all you see is trees. This was a huge pond, and there were stories of people drowning in there. I mean, they were, but then you have some of these trees, over towards. This is over towards our land. Well, this is your land up towards here, isn't it? Pretty close? On the other side of the hill is your,
To the right.
Yeah.
It's that whole hillside.
Yes, that's, ta-da.
The big building in the middle of the stream.
This one or this one?
No, that's Bell's house.
That was Jenny Bell's, yeah.
Keep going right.
Yeah,
Keep going right there.
yeah,
There was a mill right there.
yeah, Mill 4,
And
yeah.
that later was a wallpaper factory.
Yes, yeah,
And then, if you go a little further right there,
yeah,
that was the old mill store,
yes,
which is still standing.
yep,
Jepson owns it
Jepson's, right.
at this point.
right,
Yeah.
right. That's, thank you for filling this in. This is just such an amazing spot. This was one of the old Wire Village bridges, and again, you said most of them were, but I'm just always amazed at the stonework, the level of craft, that whole area that you're talking about, and all the way up along with the canals and the factories was amazing. This is down at the corner of Gold. So Gold Nugget would, I have to move this. Gold Nugget would be coming up here. This is Paxton Road. You're heading up towards Wire Village School. These were all, as I said, these were the houses that were built for them. Yeah, but again, dirt roads. My father actually grew up in a house right over here. But this was what Paxton Road in that intersection. And at that intersection, if you're coming down from Spencer, this is on the corner. This house is still there. The porch is still there. And this was Richard Sugden's original house. He eventually built the mansion over here. And his wife was a Sagendorf, but his second wife was Sagendorf. His first wife actually is shown in this picture. She took her own life, sadly, and then he did not come back. Her daughter was very ill. We actually have his daughter Eva's diary we've transcribed, and she talks about living in this house and about her mother tending to her younger sister. And this is now, from where we were talking about before, where the mill was, this is where Turkey Hill Brook comes down. Actually, if you go much farther up, there's a lot of beavers in there now. It's, again, how landscape changes. That has really changed that. This was, you know, in its time, this brook was supporting multiple mills all the way up to the other ponds, but and this was had a more of a canal. It had more walls. Do you remember, you know, how that was built? So this is, you know, just heading over towards where the George Farm is now. It would be on the same side. But this is what the brook looks like now in the middle of summer. It's down, obviously down a little bit. This is on the left side. If you just pass that brook and you're going to where the George's horse farm, their house on the right, this was on the left. This is all trees. You can't tell how big this is, but this was down just off of Gold Nugget, and you were actually looking over towards Wire Village. This was the ball field for the team. I have a picture of one of my uncles with the team, you know, Wire Village, I mean the Wire Mill team shirts, but they actually built this down in the field. So this is actually George's property.
Yeah, the field is still there.
Yes, yeah,
Just everything got washed out.
right. Yeah, the way the river looks is, I know on our land too, we're farther down on the brook, and it changed the way it looked. But this was one of the ways. So again, it wasn't that you just worked in the mill, it was part of your life. And in Sugden's case particularly, I mean, he really supported all of that. Somebody here is going to recognize, this is McCormick Road. This is down at the bottom of McCormick Road. You're going along Gold Nugget, you'd be heading back over towards Hastings. This is just a nondescript, you know, a bunch, and probably some invasive species are grown in here. And this is what was here before. This is the Wire Village School. It was one of Spencer's official schoolhouses. My grandmother went to this one, and that I showed you the jitney earlier. Mr. Parker would drive the village bell, and the kids went to school in this. Well, now when you look at, when we're talking about how landscape changes, this is it. This is what happens when.
That's the foundation is still.
Yes.
in the wood.
Yeah. Yeah, which is kind of fun when you're out in the woods. Sometimes you're trying to, when you do hiking or you go out in the woods and you're trying to piece what was here. Yeah. By my generation, it was Pleasant Street School that you went to. This was gone. And I'm getting towards the end now of this. By the way, thank you. Everyone has been so attentive. I realize sitting in the dark and seeing all of these is a challenge. So this next series is talking about what Common Ground has been involved in for some time. And I've just taken a few examples of some of the properties that we have. Either in this case, Common Ground worked with the state to put an APR, an agricultural preservation restriction, so that the Meacheks now, so that this will be farmland in perpetuity. And you know, you look at this field, that's when we talked about what had happened when that water came through, and the Army Corps of Engineers had to come in. It was amazing. But this is a small trail that the small family worked with us, and so there is a trail here. For those of you who know this area, it's probably the wettest it's ever been that I've ever seen it. The trail follows the river. It's meant for hiking and fishing. It is still underwater, but up in here is the farmland. And if you take a walk down on some of our trails, you'll see these signs. We have them signposted. We've got some hardy trail workers and designers who place these so that you can follow this area along. Down in here, we have other invasives. We have the rugosa rose. We have a lot of other things that require maintenance. This is one of the members, someone had done an aerial, this is the drone view, correct? Yes. This is a drone view of that same area. So here we are at Meadow Street. And again, this is just to give you an idea of the type. It's prime agricultural land, and the Meacheks are really quite serious about. They are now in the process of installing a drip irrigation system, which will save water. They can also, they know their soil, they know what kind of, they do integrated pest management so that they're not just putting pollutants into the river, which is going through here.
Mary, can I insert?
Yeah. Oh, do you want to go back to it?
Yeah, just a little bit. The Meachek family actually had farmed it on a lease for 30 years, sweat and blood for 30 years, to support their where they sold their produce. And they could not afford to pay for it. A farmer can't afford to pay for it at development prices. So the state has this APR that they will put money in so that a farmer can buy it at farmland prices and not development. And that extra money that the farmer has, that the PC doesn't have, that the seller gets, is that restriction. So the restriction is that piece of property can never be developed and used for anything else than commercial agriculture. It could be hay, but any kind of agriculture that's commercial, it could be a flower farm or whatever. It can't be houses, it can't be solar. It has to be commercial agriculture. So we played the middleman. And that one was kind of exciting for me. I have to tell you a personal story. Your town of Spencer had some money, the Conservation Commission, we worked very closely with them. They had some money, a little pile of money, that they could put, the town has to put money toward an APR. If the state's gonna put an APR on it and give money, the town has a little sliver of money. They didn't have a big enough sliver. So our land trust was able to raise from people like you and businesses, and we even had a can up at fairgrounds on a table, We raised $8,000 and we gave it to the town, and that was so exciting. I got to have the check and sign it and hand it to the select board at the selectmen's meeting and say, here's the rest of it that you don't have, so you can buy in to the APR. That was really an interesting role for me. I'd never done it. And I remember a young man sitting there, and as I walked out, he goes, I've never seen anybody do that before. So that was like when I was kind of new at doing things, and our treasurer was gone, so I was the one that had to, rip the check out and hand it to him. I think you were on the select board. You were there, John. That was like, you guys were happy and we were happy.
Yes, it was a great collaboration.
It was great. So a land trust is a collaborator and a middleman, as a lot of what we do. And I just wanted to share that with you. We went up to have a dedication of as part of that whole deal, the small farm family actually gave the land trust the trail easement. That was kind of our reward for playing middleman. So the farmer gets his land, the family that owned it, they got their money that they wanted, and the role we did and all the hard work that we do, and it's a lot of paperwork, we got the trail easement that goes along the river. So that's the way it is. I just wanted to...
Thank you, Jen. No, I was hoping you would.
That's how we work. And when you get, are you going to show anything on Sibley?
Yes.
I can tell you how we work.
Yes, yes. This is the opportunity for us to be smart about what we want our town to look like in the future. We are more than ever going to be controlling what happens. So hence these landscapes that sort of, had their own life to them, now we're beginning to take them away. And so that's where we sometimes, and we're not saying every piece of land has to be an open space, but we're saying we need to be conscious and make choices and decide for ourselves what our town should look like. And that's going to be always a compromise between, you have to have businesses, you have to have houses, but that's where we're going. And this is just another piece. And I'm using this, I also coach the high school Envirothon team, and one year we were looking at agricultural soils. This is amazing. I'm a gardener, and I just go, I would love this. All right, speaking of Sibley Farm, I'll go through some pictures, and then maybe you can pick up there.
Wow, where did you get that one?
In the middle of the night, I snuck it's actually on our website.
No, that's
Oh,
in the yellow.
yes, it is.
That sign in it.
We say, yes, and yes, and look how happy everybody looks in the middle of the rain. She went out. I wanted to make sure you knew this. So,
Just inside the stone wall.
yep. So this is a property, and this is a sort of a broader view of that beautiful piece of land. Midstate Trail is part of this because this also is what part of this was working with the Greater Worcester Land Trust, but also with Mass Audubon. So we have multiple entities who are trying to keep this piece of land. And just to give you an idea, this is what the Sibley Farm operation looked like. This was down on Route 9, and this building you'll probably see. It was a car dealership for a long time. These buildings, this is now where the high school is. there was many of us who grew up in Spencer who this was your first field trip. I went to Pleasant Street School, my first field trip, and you've heard this before, I'm sure. You would go to Sibley's, you would have the whole tour, and then at the end of the tour, you each got an individual chocolate milk, and it was the highlight of second grade for many of us. So that's the story of it. And then this is just another view, again, photobomb by the Sibley Mansion. So this obviously before 1937. This is where that car dealership is.
That building that you just showed
Yeah.
is still there
Yes.
with a cupola on top.
Yeah.
When it was built, it was the most modern milking barn
Yeah.
there was anywhere.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was a bottling plant, and it was.
I worked there.
Okay. Oh, so you helped with the chocolate milk. This just another view of the Sibley, and this is where I was saying, look at how well dressed these people. These aren't the farmers. These are the people out here. This is quite the. And they're looking at. They did Jersey and Guernseys.
This could be the auction.
It is. It's the Sibley. It is the auction. We have one.
Cute story on this. My father went to the auction, and he thought it was the craziest thing in the world. Getting cows. They were only worth a couple $100 a piece and so on. He came home and he was white. He sat down, he told my mother, you'd never believe it. He said a bull sold for $33,000 at that
Yeah.
auction.
Yeah.
That's how magnificent that herd was.
It was.
told when we did research on Sibley, when we were doing the fundraising, we did a lot of historical research, that there were Jersey dairies all over the United States, that thought that this Jersey herd was the prime.
Yeah.
And they came from everywhere to get the jerseys from Sibley.
Yeah, that farm also, Elm Hill in Brookfield.
Yeah.
Yes. Elm Hill.
Yes.
Where Elsie? Yes.
Right.
That was the second highest.
We've
Yeah.
had 3 herds in Spencer. This one, Proctor's Farm.
Yeah.
The Ashia herd got sent to California.
Hmm.
It was that good.
Hmm.
And the Abbey, the Holsteins, it got dissolved by the government because they felt they had too tight a control on the bloodstream.
Yes.
And all the best cows were ending up there. So they made them break up the herd.
Yeah, and actually in the museum we have the actual auction catalogs for a lot of these. It was a pretty impressive. Oddly enough, the first Jersey herd in Spencer was held by Mr. Bemis, the painter of these paintings. They're practically mooing. He painted more cows than anything else. He had the first Jersey herd and was well known for that. So Spencer has a really amazing dairy thing. This is from a brochure that they gave out at the time, and you could come out here. They were advertising. You could come out here again. Photobomb. There's the mansion again. Here's the lovely herd. This says a merry children's picnic at the Dairy Cottage. And then the new edition provides unusual facilities combined with very attractive surroundings. There's the Sibley milk thing. And I noticed in the menu here, you perhaps can't read it, but the menu is telling us that you could get Jersey milk in bottles. You could get berries, crackers, and milk. I don't remember ever going to a restaurant for that. You could get sandwiches that were things like marmalade or egg or ham or chicken special, and then you could get ice cream. But this is the Dairy Cottage, and that actually, the house is still there. It's to the right of the, and actually someone who volunteers in the museum grew up in this house, Nancy. And then they had, the milk rotates at the Jersey Bar in Main Street in Worcester. And this was at the end of the era. This is the Mill Pond near Ahern's. This was one of the Sibley farms that was right on Route 9, right at the bottom of this. Jan, did you want to add something? This is just one last picture of Burncoat Pond. So this is contiguous with the property, but would you like to add something?
I just wanted to share with you that the Sibley Farm project, and it's combined with the Warner Horse Farm that was Seven Springs Stable. That land was combined. There was a project of 4 entities to pull that off, and at the time when it happened, there was a brand new land grant. I guess it's a grant, I was going to say, that the state had just established for large pieces of land that could be preserved so that there would be wildlife habitat that wasn't chopped up and broken, that could be a wildlife corridor. And the money that came from the state for this was the very first one that was given in the state. And it was really unusual. It needed 500 acres. And between the two farms, there was only like 350 or so. And it actually, the whole land grant extends west across Greenville Street and goes into the wetlands and that other little pond and way over toward almost to Ash Street, but there's a lot of wetlands, Ash Street. So they were added, that land is under Fish and Wildlife and DCR, but it was a part of the whole grant, so there would be a wildlife corridor. And it's really unusual, they let there be an exception of Greenville Street breaking that, but they wanted to get the whole corridor. But the 4 entities was really, really interesting. And I want to give a shout out that's really good. A lot of people have mixed feelings about the Mass Audubon Association. You're on one side of the fence or the other. But they did a really, really fantastic job of spearheading that whole project. And they came to the town of Spencer and they did a survey and they asked the citizens in Spencer, what do you want that land to be used for? What do you want to do with it if it gets set aside as open space? What do you want? And people were, talked about horseback riding and training their dogs and cross-country skiing and snowmobiling and they say hunting is, the whole thing. And they really listened. And Audubon did not have a good access to get onto their sanctuary land that's further south on Greenville Street. They couldn't get into it. The only access they had for parking and to get on trails is right up by Spencer Country Inn and down that polar road where the putting is. So there's only like 3 parking spaces along a dirt road across the street from a couple of houses. And that's the only access they had to the nature sanctuary that they had. So we looked at, other things. So if you were actually to go down Greenville Street and park in the parking lot that says Sibley Farm and that parking lot is literally owned by Audubon and they maintain it. They keep it open, it's plowed in the winter, the trails are mowed. They do that so that it's access for their sanctuary, it's access for Sibley. But in order to pull that deal off, so Audubon was the first partner, actually a land agent for Audubon is the one that spearheaded and started doing it. Common Ground Land Trust was brand new. We were just beginning to organize. I probably came to president, 6 months before that. Didn't have a clue what I was doing, I'll be honest with you. Didn't have a clue, and did I ever find out? I jumped into a frying pan, and people like the Snow family, jumped in with me. And we hadn't found Mary yet, she was still in the library. But we became boots on the ground. The signs that people put up, and we were asking people, to donate and writing letters and all that. And Spencer, the town of Spencer, and Spencer did a really, really huge, brave thing. The citizens in Spencer actually voted a large chunk of money on the town hall floor, and I don't know if any of you were around when that happened, but it's probably the last time that big a chunk of money was voted on the town hall floor, but there had to be a certain percentage of money that came from the town to match that state grant. And then a lot of foundations and a lot of individuals. It was huge. And that's how it happened. There was 4 entities and we had to work together. It was a huge project. But you have an unbelievable piece of land. I don't know how many of you have ever enjoyed it or walked on the trails or done anything out there. Paula left. She trains her dog out on the field. And Melican's in the back, they're helping us. We're experimenting with planting some American chestnut trees to see if we can get chestnuts started. It's a slow, time, painful process. We tried to go up and plant some in the old apple orchard just a couple weeks ago, and the soil is so wet that we decided that we would rot the roots. So we didn't put any in yet. We're looking for a drier spot. But I just wanted you to know that when open space and projects happen, they come about with lots of work, lots of time, but a lot of people working in a lot of different ways. And it can only happen when there's partnerships.
So I'm getting to the end of the program. I just want to mention a couple of some initiatives that are happening, some ways we're looking at some of these landscapes. There, several years ago, 2012, I think, there was the DCR and some other entities came out to Spencer, and they went to several towns, but they had as citizen groups, and we looked at all of the different areas in Spencer, and their thing is written here. They believe that heritage landscape, the places that haven't been changed yet, reflect the agrarian, the agricultural past that we had, and industrial past, while providing recreational and educational opportunities for today. That's what they're looking at. And so they came up, this is just one sheet. There's a whole, you can go online, it's the Spencer Reconnaissance Report, and it identifies things like the Wilson property, the Green property, a number of others, some of which have already been lost. And so, for instance, this is probably familiar to some of you, the old Wilson House. They've been trying very hard to place this in on the National Register and some kind of restriction. But at the time the report was done in 2012, this had not yet been developed. Well, it has since become a huge farm. And so at the end of that report, oh no, this was 2008, Spencer's, and this is looking at the town. So the state is looking at towns around here, at how we're managing this. Spencer's experiencing significant growth pressure and will need to determine how it will affect the rural character of the community and the heritage landscapes that the community finds valuable. That's some of the work that a lot of us are doing in trying to look at what needs to happen. There's another report that the Harvard Forest folks did. Again, they do amazing research. This has just recently come out. I've done a couple of workshops on this. Changes to the Land. It's a booklet you can get from them, or an online resource that looks at how all of this red that you see here is development, and what they're looking at. And they took 3 towns to look at. They took a suburban town, North Andover. They took what's called a sprawl frontier town. That's Spencer. That's us, our nice little square shape. And a rural town, Beckett, Mass, way out in the west. And they looked through several scenarios and looked at our town. So I want to point out that this is being evaluated. People are looking at how we all manage our open space. And the conclusions, if the scenarios work out, there is this increasing network of the reds and the yellows, the development, the fragmented development. And they're saying that Spencer, if there is no conscious effort to look at it, Spencer becomes part of this whole area that becomes impervious. It's parking lots, it's developments. You can develop, I mean, our town, I know, at least looks at things like low impact development. So having houses that are clustered, houses that do have rain gardens and all kinds of other features. But that our towns are looking, without doing anything, our towns are looking at becoming less important. We also have something else, the town of Spencer, this is on the website. We actually have an open space and recreation plan, but look, it's 2012. I understand the town planner is actually working now to renew this, to get this going again, because a lot has happened since 2012. And the goals back in 2012 were to protect our water resources, to retain Spencer's rural small town character. Everyone says that about Spencer, but the trend is going the other way. To enhance recreation, to preserve our open spaces, to establish a continuing process. And this, I'm going to leave you with, this is our newest process, and you were going to mention, this is the Kiston property on the border of Charlton that we are looking at. I just wanted to leave you with a picture of where some of our landscapes are going.
So we used the term APR. I want to give you a couple of other initials. CR, conservation restriction. So I'm going to give you, for instance, John, you got 20 acres behind your house, okay? It's been in the family for a long time. It's kind of special to you. You'd like to leave it wooded, but maybe you'd like to cut some wood off for your wood stove once in a while. You don't want houses built on it. You don't want to cut the forest down and put solar on it. But you're not real rich either. You'd like to have a little money for your future. So a conservation restriction is that a land trust would work with you and your lawyer, and it's written up with the restrictions that you want to allow and not allow. The state would like to see there be some benefit, so maybe you would allow the snowmobile trail to go across the back part, or you would allow a footpath if there was, another piece of property that abutted, there could be a little trail. That would be a public good. Or maybe you abut another piece of land and it could be part of a wildlife corridor, whatever. So you would own the land, but the restrictions would restrict you from ever developing it. You could sell the land. Your children could inherit the land, but the restrictions stay. But you get some money from the state for doing that, for allowing it to remain open space. And we, the land trust, are the middleman between you and the state. And select board has to sign off on a conservation restriction. Those things have happened in this town. We're looking at those things. We want people to look at property that they own or their neighbors own. Maybe there's a farm next door and the guy doesn't know what he's going to do with it. His kids moved to California and they don't want to farm anymore. So those kinds of things can happen very positively, and that's what we look at as a land trust. And so I wanted you to know what a CR is. If somebody says that, or it's a conservation restriction, we work with your local conservation commission, we work with the board of selectmen, we work with the planning board, we work with the town planner. We all have to do this in partnership to figure out what it is we do and don't want to happen in our neighborhoods. Does that make a clear picture of how we work together in really positive ways?
Well said, and that concludes my presentation for this evening. Thank you, Jan.